So in this video, we're going to start off looking at Express. So Express is a web framework built on Node. Basically, it's this set of sort of conventions and terminologies and features that sit on top of the Node HTTP module. Now, you might be familiar with the HTTP module if you had seen any of my last couple of courses on Node. Basically, it just allows us to serve out files or content, whatever content you want, over HTTP. Well, Express is built on top of that. And like I said, it provides basic conventions that allow us to describe our applications in a straightforward way. Now, obviously, we're not going to take a look at all of the things that Express can do. You can check out the documentation. It's a very popular framework, so there's a lot of stuff. If there's a specific thing you want to do, you can check it out. This video is all about kind of getting used to how Express likes to work and how we can incorporate that with Socket.io for WebSocket connection. So again, we're not going to take a look at all the features of Express, but we will learn enough about Express to use it to build the application that we're wanting to build. So let's go and get started. I'm going to move this off to the side. And what I have open here is an empty folder, just an empty folder, and then a command window. Yeah, that is currently in that folder. And since we are going to be building a Node project, I do want to start off with an npm init. And so I'm going to type in npm init and hit enter. And then I'm just going to accept all of these defaults. I'm not particularly concerned about any of the options here. And so to start off using Express, the first thing we're going to want to do in our newly created application, represented by this package JSON, is npm install express -- save. So we'll do npm install express save. And I'm using save and I'm not using save dev, which you might be more familiar with me using in the previous courses when we were installing build tools and all that fun stuff. And the reason I'm doing that is Express is going to constitute something that we need at runtime. It's a package that we need if we were wanting to install this this package on a server or whatever. So we use just the straight up save. So I'm just going to hit enter. Express isn't really all that big, but there are bits of terminology that is important to understand about it, which is the purpose of this section. So now that I've done that, I'm going to go ahead and open up my editor. And so that's going to open up Visual Studio Code, which I believe I've mentioned before is the editor that I'm going to be using exclusively. I am also going to do something that is specific to the way I have Visual Studio Code set up, and I might as well take a moment to quickly talk about it because we are going to be doing this for the main application, and I do this for even trivial applications that I put together. With Visual Studio Code, I have the ESLint plugin installed, which you can install by hitting Control-Shift-P, ext install, hit enter, and then type in ESLint. And install that plugin. It's a very, very nice plugin. And what ESLint does is it makes sure that we're writing good JavaScript. It's basically the the rundown of what ESLint does. But we also need to configure ESLint because I'm going to be doing things that go against some of the ESLint defaults for the plugin that I have in my editor. So I'm going to come over here and I'm going to type in ESLint and --init. If you don't have ESLint installed and you want to install it, just npm install -g ESLint. And now it wants to build up my config file for me. So I'm going to go ahead and select answer questions about your style. I will be using some ES 2015 features. I will not be using ES 2015 modules. I'm going to be running this on Node and the browser. So I'm using my arrow key to select this Node thing here, and I'm going to hit space to select that. Then I'll hit enter. I do use CommonJS, so I'll type in yes. I do not use JSX, so I'll leave that as the default. I'm going to select tabs for this, because I use tabs. And for quotes, I'm going to use double quotes. And then finally, for me, the line endings that I have code configured to are Windows-style line endings, so I'll do that. And I do require semicolons, and I highly recommend you guys do too. And for the format, I'm going to select JSON. And the reason I'm doing that is that's going to be the format that my plugin for VS Code is going to pick up on. So VS Code will actually show me ESLint errors in my code, which is nice. So we'll type in JSON, and all that's, or not type in, but select. And all that's going to do is create this ESLint.rc file with all of these all these parameters that I just specified. But with that out of the way, let's go ahead and create a basic HTTP server with Express. We have everything we need to do that now. So I'm going to right-click over here, and I'm going to create a new file, and I'm going to call it server.js. And you can call this file whatever you want. This is just going to be the node file that starts up your web server and installs Express into it. I am going to specify at the top use strict so that I can get away with using let and const to define variables within closures. Now, if you don't know what that means, that's okay. But we're not going to have to do use strict in every single thing that we write, by the way, because our transpiler in the future sections will take care of that for us. So let's go ahead and import the two packages or the two modules that we're going to need to work with this. So the first one is going to be HTTP, so I'm going to require an HTTP, and the second one is going to be Express, so require an Express. Now, the relationship between HTTP and Express I've already talked about. HTTP is the built-in node module that creates a very fast, well-performing HTTP server within Node. It's built-in. You can use it whenever you want. Read the documentation on the Node documentation website. And then Express is just a framework that sits on top of HTTP. So to create an Express app, what we're going to do is I'm going to say const app equals Express, and I'm simply going to call it as a function. And by doing that, we now have an instance of an Express application that we can configure. Now, it isn't hooked into our HTTP module yet. We'll be doing that shortly. So the app variable is what, or object rather, is what we're going to use to configure Express to do what we want it to do. So before we do any of that configuration, oh, by the way, these squigglies are because ESLint is telling me that a variable is defined but never used. So those squigglies will go away in a moment. Let's just go ahead and create our server. So I'm going to say, I'm simply going to say const server equals new http.server, and I'm going to pass an app. So the Express app that was created is a object that understands what the HTTP server constructor wants. And it'll hook in. This is the integration between Express and the HTTP module. So we're, of course, doing http.server because the HTTP module brings in quite a few different classes that we can instantiate. You'll see sometimes people do something like var uppercase server equals require http.server. You'll see this very, very often where we import HTTP, but then we only grab the server class or the server constructor function, and we alias that out. In this case, I'm importing the entire package as this variable. I tend to find that to be cleaner. A lot of people like doing weird things up in their requires. I don't like that so much, especially since it doesn't translate into ES 2015 module syntax very well. Anyway, so we have our Express app, and we have our HTTP server, but obviously it's not going to do anything yet because we haven't told the server to do anything. If we just ran this, if I just came over here and typed in node space server and hit enter, you'll see it just terminates and doesn't do anything particularly interesting. So how do we tell the server that it needs to bind itself to a port so we can access it through a web browser? Well, that's actually very straightforward. We simply do server.listen, and then we pass in a port number. And a very common port number for node development is 3000. Other people like the port 8080. Just make sure it's a high port number so that it doesn't get confused with any other services that might be running on your machine. And in some operating systems, you can't bind to lower ports without administrative privileges. But 3000, I think, is just one of the most common ports I've seen. So we're going to bind our server to port 3000. And there is a callback function as a second parameter. And this callback function simply is invoked when the server is started. And you'll often see people doing something like console log server started on port 3000. Or sometimes you'll see const port equals 3000 and then pass in port and then turn this into a template string and do port, something like that. So just so we're not repeating 3000 multiple times. In production, you'll generally get the port from one of your environment variables. Now, ESLint is complaining that I'm using the console. So before we start this, I am going to fix that real fast. So if you're following along with ESLint and Visual Studio Code, like I highly recommend that you do, you can hover over the squigglies and it'll tell you what rule is failing. And in this case, the no console rule is failing. So I'm going to open up my ESLint.json. And in my rules, so you see the entire file, in my rules, let me hide that so we get more room. I'm going to come down here to the bottom, and I'm going to say node-console, and if I look at the documentation, it says 0 turns it off, 1 turns it into a warning, and 2 turns it into an error. So I'm going to say noconsole 0 for this. Now, if you do change your ESLint.json, I don't know about other editors, but in Visual Studio Code at least, you're going to have to make sure to close your files out. So close these files, and then load them back up again so that it gets the updated configuration. Anyway, with all of that out of the way, we can now type in node server and hit enter. And it says server started on port 3000. So if you got an error there, that could be because you have another application listening on port 3000. Remember, you could only have one application listening per port at any given time. So make sure that you don't have anything bound to that. And if you do, either change the port number or kill whatever program is stealing that port from you. Anyway, so let's go ahead and come over here to our web browser. If I can move that over. What we'll get is cannot get /. So actually, we're getting a 404. Specifically, failed to load resource, the server responded with status of 404. And the reason we're getting that is because we haven't configured Express to know about any of the paths that are available within our application. And the / just refers to the fact we're trying to get the home page. If I did something like ble, it'll say cannot get / ble. So that's interesting. So we know Express is working, but we haven't told it to respond with anything. Express is not going to do anything out of the box. That's one of the most important things about understanding Express. It's very minimalistic, which it even says that on the homepage. It won't do anything out of the box. If you want it to do something, you're going to have to do one of two things. You're going to have to create middleware, or you're going to have to create routes. Well, in this video, let's go ahead and just take a look at creating a route. So I'm going to come over here. And what I'm going to do is after we create our app, but before we create our server, I'm going to create a route. And to create a route, we simply do app, which is again our Express server, dot, and then a verb. So an HTTP verb being get, post, delete, put, options, blah, 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 blah. And remember, the default verb when navigating to a site is get. So we'll do app.get, and then the next thing it's going to want is it's going to want a path. And specifically, it's going to want a path that has a bunch of different things for options for capturing query strings and all that fun stuff. We're not worrying about that in this series. So I'm just going to say app-get /, and then what it wants is it wants a callback that takes two objects. Those two objects are request and response. So this might be familiar to you guys if you saw the previous video where we used the straight up HTTP server. Well, in this case, we're using Express, but it gives us the same sort of deal. We have our request and our response, and these are streams just like before, except they can have additional attributes and additional methods attached to them by Express. So this is where Express comes to play. It's sort of supercharging our standard HTTP.server, which is exactly what it does. So in this case, I'm simply going to say response.end hello world. And what that's going to do is it's simply going to write out the text hello world to the stream, and then it's going to end the stream. Now, if we came back over to our page and refreshed, it'll still say cannot get /, and that's a really, really important thing to note. When we run any node script, it runs the script from start to bottom, and if something binds to a port or opens a stream or sets a timeout or something, the process will stay open. So in this case, the process is staying open because server.listen has been invoked, and that keeps the process open because we bound to a port. However, that means that as far as this running process is concerned, this script no longer exists. It's not going to go back into the script and find out what additional things we changed. So that's a very important thing to keep in mind. We have to restart the server every time we make a change. Now, of course, so I'm going to come over here and hit Control-C. Of course, there is a tool that'll allow us to do this for us, and it's a very handy tool for development. So if you don't have Nodemon already, I recommend you type in npm -g, or how about just install -g nodemon and hit enter. So the -g flag will install that globally throughout our system so we can access Nodemon anywhere. So now what I can do is I can type in nodemon space server. And what that's going to do is it's going to start this script, but if I changed any of this text and hit Control-S, it stops it and then it restarts it. So now that we've restarted our server, a handful of times anyway, we can come over here and hit refresh, and we get hello world. So not particularly interesting. We can inspect what was sent back by coming over here to our network tab and selecting this. And so we didn't get a whole lot of interesting things. We got a response headers, X powered by Express. We don't even have a content type. We do have a content length, though, that was added automatically by ending the stream, and all that fun stuff. So we've now created a basic Express application. Now, this isn't very impressive or very interesting, but it's the basics of how to work with Express. We basically say, hey, create Express, configure Express, create server, tell server to listen. That's the basic process that we go through when writing Express applications. Anyway, in the next video, we're going to expand upon this and talk about middleware. So we will see you guys then.